So I saw this this job posting, and it said clinical research coordinator. And I said, what's this? So I started, reading the job description, and there's the list is like this long. This long. Like stuff you do. I was like, this sounds very intriguing, but I have no idea what any of it means.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today, we're joined by Amy Miller, a nurse with 17 years of experience in specialties ranging from ER and OR to hospice and research. After exploring multiple areas of nursing, Amy found her passion in clinical research. In this episode, Amy shares her insights on the key differences between brick-and-mortar research and decentralized research, the role of a clinical research nurse, and the vital importance of clinical trials in developing new therapies. Amy also sheds light on the urgency and unique challenges of oncology research, where patients are often racing against time to find a cure. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Audrey. It's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a lot of good stuff to talk about today, and I know that we're going to deep dive a little bit into the world of clinical research, which I think is great because I think it's an area of nursing where a lot of nurses just don't have a lot of information and knowledge on the topic. So I'm excited for you to share a little bit of your world with us.
Yeah, it is interesting how everywhere I go, I mention clinical research. I tell these young nurses out of school, like, hey, if you ever get tired of what you're doing, there is something else. And I, mention clinical research, and they're like, what's that? And you can see them shutting down because you see research. They're like, I just got done writing a paper to this class and I don't want anything to do with that. So I try to just a little bit tell them surface, what it's about, and they don't seem to want to listen. But hopefully your audience will be ready to hear what this is all about, because it really is nothing like what you think when you think of research.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not talking about research papers in this podcast. This is going to be a much more exciting discussion.
That's correct.
So let's rewind just a little bit and talk about how you found your way into research. You have experience across multiple specialties. So talk to me about the beginning of your nursing career and how you got drawn into clinical research from working at the bedside.
Well, most people you ask that are in research, clinical research, you say, how did you get into it? And an overwhelming amount of people say, well, I just sort of fell into it. And it's true. There are people out there that search for this career path, and they want to work for a contract research organization or a sponsor. But most people on my end of the business just kind of found it because they were looking for something different than what they were doing. And that is kind of what happened to me. So I did start out of nursing school. I started in a very busy downtown ER. I didn't really get burnt out there, but I did say after a couple of years, I thought, okay, there's something besides 12-hour shifts. So I did a whole slew of things. And it might appear looking at my resume that I get bored easily, which is clinical research is a great cure for that because you're always doing something different. So for me, I was working in a GI lab, and I was pretty much just started at this hospital, and I was thinking, okay, I'm not going to be at the bedside forever. What else can I be looking for at this hospital? Because I don't want to leave. So I saw this this job posting, and it said clinical research coordinator. I said, what's this? So I started, reading the job description, and there's just, the list is like this long. This long. Like stuff you do. I was like, this sounds very intriguing, but I have no idea what any of it means. So I went ahead and applied. I talked to the hiring manager, and I got hired. And then I found out what you really do, which it's a lot. You would never get bored because there's always something going on. So that's how I got.
Yeah, and so talk to us more about that first role. Like, what did that look like? I think it's also interesting that your employer was still the hospital that you were working for. So what exactly did that role entail?
I got lucky working at a hospital that actually does clinical research, because not all hospitals do clinical research. Mine is a large, academic hospital. They do a lot of things there. So I happened to get into a position that was for GI and liver research, specific to GI and liver, which worked out because I was coming from the GI lab. So it was an easy transition into research for that, because I already knew the diseases they were studying, and I didn't have to learn a whole new clinical set. I just had to learn the research piece. So what it looked like was no more scrubs, business casual, sitting in front of a computer a lot more than seeing patients. I'd say it's probably 90 to 95% computer and 5% patient facing, because you still have to see your patients to draw their blood or do whatever measurements or tests or whatever is in the protocol for that particular visit. So your patients are coming into the clinic. So you leave your little office wherever you're, practicing your research, and you go down to the clinic, you see your patient with the doctor, and then you go back to your office and document.
From the patient's point of view, let's break down a little bit like what they're participating in, and start to break down some of those misconceptions that nurses coming out of nursing school have of clinical research. What is foundationally really happening in that setting?
So sometimes there will be no therapy available for their particular condition, and they're out of options. So if they're lucky to have a doctor who is on board with doing research, and not all of them are, but if they are, then they can be enrolled in a study that will offer some type of medication that's being developed for this condition. Sometimes they will actually get the medication, and sometimes they'll get a placebo. And these protocols, which can be 100, 200 pages long, usually they're almost 200 pages long. They spell out every detail. It's kind of like a recipe for the trial with every detail you can imagine. And so sometimes it's 1-to-1, they get the medication or they get the placebo. Sometimes it's 2-to-1. So the patient doesn't know, but they always feel better when they get a little bit better of a chance of getting the actual medication. So they don't know. They think that it's going to help them, but they aren't promised that it's going to help them. Because really these clinical trials aren't for the people that are coming in front of you right now. They're coming for everybody after that, when these medications get onto the market. So it's really a long-term project. It's not, and a lot of nurses are like, but I want to help my patients right in front of me. And well, you are helping them. But if they're getting the placebo, then they may not get any better. So,
yeah, and you have to have a placebo control in research. So that's just kind of the nature of the game. Do you feel like a lot of patients have a good understanding of that concept, that, they're participating in this study, that, there is a chance it could help them, but more likely than not, they are participating in order to help others with a similar condition down the road?
No, I don't think that's how most of them feel. I think if they acknowledge it, they're like just super hopeful that they're going to get the treatment. But most of them are really kind of just thinking about them and how, and because I mean, really, they're the ones suffering with some condition and they want relief for it, right? So they're just like, anything I can try, I'm going to do it. But it's very important when you're signing the informed consent with them that they understand you have to, some of these informed consents are 20 pages or 25 pages long, and you have to go through the whole thing with them so they understand every single aspect of what's going to happen to them in this trial. And they have to voluntarily say, yes, I will go, through with all of this. So there is that part in the consent that says, there is a chance you're not going to get the drug. There's a chance you're going to get the placebo. And so that's all explained ahead of time. So they are very well aware of it. But most of them still, are really hoping that they're getting the drug.
Right, right. And when you first stepped into this role, what do you think were some of the major differences that you noticed coming from Bedside, or some of the bigger things that you found to be a challenge, whether that was new things that you needed to learn, or, the difference between being on your feet all day versus spending a lot of time at the computer? What were some of those key factors for you?
You just said it. Like, sitting at a computer for most of the day is so different than running up and down the hallway and trying to figure out when are you going to chart, and oh my gosh, I haven't eaten and it's already like 4:30. What am I going to do? I can't take a break. I'm going to get in trouble because I haven't taken my lunch yet. All of those things, all that goes away. That is really great. You really have a lot of autonomy over how you manage your day and your time. There's a lot of different things that have to be done, but most of the time you can decide how you want your day to go and what you're going to do in what order. Sometimes there are things that become urgent, and there's the important and the urgent, and then there's the important and not urgent. So you just have to triage all of your activity for the day. Of course, when patients call and have questions or whatever, then you stop whatever it is you're doing and you take care of that. Sometimes the doctors who, if they are the principal investigator or PI, which is how we call the doctors that are running the trial, sometimes they have questions and you have to stop what you're doing and answer their questions. Sometimes they have a patient in clinic and they call you and say, hey, I have a patient here. I think that they might qualify for this trial. Can you, come talk to them, give them a consent, let them read it. And once they sign consent, then you can start screening, which means then you really get to find out, look deep in their chart, see if they meet all the parameters for the study, and start doing those tests to get them going. So things do come up like that, and you rarely get to finish what you're working on before something else lands on your desk or in your computer, as it were. But so sometimes that can feel a little bit overwhelming, because you are learning new processes. You have a lot of systems, computer systems to learn and that kind of thing. But I think most nurses, when they are tired of running on their feet, they don't mind, learning something new like that.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
so and really, if you get into an area of research that you don't have any experience with, like was never an oncology nurse. I didn't really know about I don't really know anything about blood cancer, when I started. Well, you learn it because the protocol has sections on why are we doing this research? Why is it important? What need is it fulfilling? And then they give, a background on the disease. So you really learn a lot just from reading the protocol.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very detailed, these studies and protocols, and why they're being done and who can be involved in them. So, I think that as nurses, we're very task oriented and we're very detail oriented. So I do feel like the detail orientation is a solid crossover. How would you describe the different types of research? And I guess what I'm asking here is, initially, talk about the differences between brick-and-mortar research and decentralized research.
Sure. So when I first started in research, I started at this hospital. Actually, I'm back there now. That is called brick-and-mortar because you are at a central site. All the patients come to that hospital, or sometimes it's not a hospital. Sometimes it's a freestanding, building. Sometimes it's a cancer center, but whatever it is a building that everyone comes to. So that would be brick and mortar. And then decentralized is relatively new in the research world. Really, it's becoming more popular because it's possible to enroll patients in trials that they wouldn't have access to a clinical trial otherwise. So one example of that is a patient in, say, let's just say Idaho. They have a super rare disease, like not very many people in the country have it. And the only doctor that treats this disease is on the other coast, on the East Coast. So they are not going to travel and every week. So let's say their study procedures happen every single week. They're not going to go all the way across the country every week to see this doctor at this site. So what happens in decentralized is a nurse goes to that patient and does whatever procedures are needed for that particular visit at their house. So it's really great for the patients who live far away, who just don't really feel like they can make it out to a doctor. Most of the time in clinical trials, you have like CTs that have to be done at certain time points, the blood work that has to be done at certain time points, EKGs have to be done, and they don't want to be running to the doctor all the time. So the nurse goes to them.
Yeah, I think that that's incredible. It's great to have the options for those that are like further out from major healthcare centers.
Yes.
And so, what different areas, I guess, or what different types of roles have you held within the research world?
Let me just further explain decentralized clinical research. There's actually a couple different types of that as well. There's the kind I just described where it's completely at the patient's home, or it could be at their work. It could be wherever they are. It doesn't have to be in one particular spot. Sometimes a patient will, and we call them subjects. Actually, we don't always call them patients because sometimes they're well and they're not a patient. They're just participating in a trial. So you call them a subject. They also, what I like to use is the word participant because a subject to me still feels a little bit like an object. And so I like to make sure I'm referring to them as a person. So participant feels better to me. So at the hospital in oncology, we call them patients because they are really, truly patients there, but sometimes they're not. So the participants will sometimes be at work. Sometimes they will go home. So you can meet them anywhere. In the other sort of model of decentralized clinical trials is like a pop-up site. So they say there's a endemic disease in some area of the country, and a lot of people in that area get a certain, I don't want to use a real example of past because I don't know if that's kosher, but so let's say people get a certain disease from mosquitoes or ticks or whatever, and this happens in that part of the country the most. So you can have a company that goes to that area so that people, they still might live an hour or 2 hours away, and then they come to a site that's in that area to get their treatment, whatever that might be, and then they go home, and then they might come like once a month or something. So in that instance, the nurses and the coordinators who work in that type of environment are working away from home, and they're traveling to these places for 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time. Then they go back home, and then they go back again. So in the first one, the first model I mentioned, you are out in this state, that state, and then you come home for the weekend. Sometimes you get to come home between trips. So, but you're on a plane most of the week. You could be on an airplane almost every day of the week, which is great because you rack up those frequent flyer miles and you get bumped up to first class quite often, which is nice. But
that is a perk.
Yeah, those perks really help out when you're on the road like that all the time. So that's the two major models of decentralized. And so I forgot what you asked me. You asked about the different roles there are.
Yeah, and some of the some of the different settings or roles that you've held yourself and kind of how those differ from a nursing perspective.
Okay. You might have heard me earlier mention the term clinical research coordinator. So that is a little bit different than a clinical research nurse, but almost all clinical research nurses are also clinical research coordinators. So this is where it gets a little bit muddled, if you will. But different companies use the two roles different ways. So certain companies will use separate clinical research coordinators and clinical research nurses so that those nurses don't do any coordinator activities at all. But if you're at a brick and mortar facility, you're probably going to be doing coordinator activities. If you're strictly a clinical research nurse, then you're the one that's going to be patient facing all the time. You're going to do all of their blood draws, all of their EKGs, everything that a nurse can do. I've even done like physician assisted physical exams over the computer. So like it's a video call and the doctor's right there watching. I'm there with the patient and they're, having me look at whatever and then telling them what I see. Sometimes the patient can get up close to the camera so they can really inspect things. I've done them before where I had to do like full neuro with all the reflexes, and you just position the camera so that the physician can see, these reflexes. That was fun. So you do all of the nursey things, and then you have to. The charting is very different. It's very different. That's a really nice thing about clinical research charting versus bedside charting. Bedside charting isn't fun. There's nothing about it that's fun. It's very stressful. Clinical trial charting it's just very specific to what you're doing for that visit. And it's very specific how you have to write things down, what you're doing. That there's I would say GCP principles, good clinical practice. You have to do a lot of training before you get into research. You can't just sign up and then go start seeing subjects because this is super heavily regulated by the FDA. And you have to adhere to the principles that are protected, that protect the patients. So it's a lot of stuff to learn like that right up front, but nurses are going to be able to learn that stuff easy. It's very regimented training.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, everything does have to be like so specific and for the trial to like mean anything, really. Like
Yes.
The data just has to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so what are the different kind of levels of trials, and where do you see nurses kind of insert, or like if nurses are present in every stage trial, and what those different kind of trials are and what those mean?
Great question. Yeah. So the way that research gets from a scientist's idea to a drug, that you can go buy on the shelves, it starts in R&D, research and development. So it starts at the sponsor in the lab with the test tubes, and they call that bench work. So it starts there, then it goes to the animals, and then it comes to the humans. So first in human there's always going to be phase 1. So there's phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Phase 1 are the trials that is you really got to have nurses here because these people are going to be having every side effect in the book. They're going to be puking, they're going to have diarrhea, they're going to have stomach aches, headaches. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening. Sometimes the two different ways you can do phase 1 is for regular drugs that aren't oncology, you start with like healthy subjects. And what they do is they basically are saying, how much of this stuff can we give to people before they get too sick? What's the highest dose we should probably go with? So that's where they're doing those. In oncology, you don't really do it that way because they're already sick. You don't want to make them sicker. So they already have a pretty good idea of what a starting dose should be. And then they start with that. And then they slowly give it to very few people. They go up a little bit. They give it to those few people. And then after those few people are enrolled in the trial, they go through their 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks, whatever it is for that protocol. Then they stop. and then they wait another 6 weeks, see how those people are doing. Then they start enrolling the next 4, 5, 6 people, and they go up the dose. These are dose escalation trials. These people are sick, so it takes the nurses to really make sure they're okay. You're always assessing them for adverse events, and anything that the sponsor would need to know, like there's a problem here. So those are phase 1. Then they move into phase 2, where you're adding a few more people. So what you're doing in phase 1 and 2 are safety and efficacy for sure. And then they get the perfect dose if they don't already know what it's going to be. And then once you do that, you move into phase 3, where you're really opening it up to, like, could be hundreds of people. Sometimes it's more than hundreds of people, a couple thousand, to spread it out. And now you're giving it to all the people who have the disease. So it's kind of confusing, because in oncology you have very specific parameters of who can get this, because it's kind of a different purpose. But for some drugs, they start with a more of a generalized population in the beginning, and then they start getting more specific and more specific, and the inclusion and exclusion criteria get very specific. So it's best for a nurse to look at that inclusion and exclusion so you don't miss anything. The doctor's supposed to be doing that as well. Some doctors do it better than others, so you really have to be sure. So coordinators can do that too, but if it's a really complicated trial, it's best to have a nurse looking, at their charts and digging really deep to make sure they actually meet all the criteria. Because if you enroll somebody in a trial who doesn't meet criteria, you can get in big trouble.
I can imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really insightful. And I know, like, throughout all of this, like, you've kind of noted some of the key differences of where oncology research differs from your, like, other general research studies. And so talk to me about how the experience of the oncology patient enrolling in this study is different, and how that affects the timeliness and, like, pressure of the trial itself.
Yeah, that was huge, because most trials take months and months to open. Once you start the process, so a sponsor will approach the doctor or anybody at the site that they already have a connection with, and they'll say, "Are you interested? We've got this trial coming. Are you interested in doing it?" So that's the first step. And then the physician says, "Yes, I'd like to do this." And you have to go through a whole feasibility process, which that in itself can take several weeks. So it can take 5 to 9 months to open a trial once you've decided, yeah, let's go for it. There's contracts, there's budgets, it's very involved with a lot of people who do that stuff that I don't know anything about. I just know it exists because I don't do budgets, and I don't do contracts, and I don't do legal stuff, and I don't want to. I'm really thankful for the people that are experts at that. But in oncology, you got people who are coming with either recurrent cancers or new cancers that are very aggressive, and there's just not time to start, from scratch. So there are ways of opening trials faster. And I don't know what kind of detail I could go into about that, but there are ways of getting them open in just a few short weeks. You do some of that pre-work with these companies, ahead of time. So you can get them open quicker, but you can never probably ever get a trial open in less than 2 weeks. So, and that's like the fastest I've ever heard of. So these patients are understandably very anxious, this might be the only treatment for them. This might be their last effort to try something. So it is stressful. It's stressful in the nurses because they really just want to do the best thing for these patients. They want to get them on this drug. They want to see if it'll work and help them. The other thing for nurses that's difficult about oncology is that not all the patients make it. A lot of the times they progress, and that's one of the reasons they're doing all these scans all the time. They're doing CT scans, and they are measuring the target lesions. So even if they have a bunch of lesions, they'll pick like a primary target lesion and they measure. So they're always comparing the same ones. It could be a lymph node, it could be a tumor, it could be whatever they pick. And if that actually progresses while they're on the study drug, then that's it. They're done. I mean, it means it's not working to them. So they have to come out of the trial. So that can be heartbreaking for nurses
Mm-hmm.
because nobody wants to lose patients. But in oncology especially in oncology research, you're going to lose patients.
Mm-hmm.
The,
Do you ever see the flip side of that? Do you ever see miracles happen when like something does work?
it's yes, it is more like you see, yeah, you can see complete response, partial response. So yeah, you do see that. And it's really celebrated. I mean, everybody loves to when a CT scan comes back and you can see it, it's shrinking or it's gone. Of course, everybody's like, oh, but is it going to come back again? So there's always that little bit of, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you do see that, and those are really celebrated moments for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you did not do oncology nursing before you were involved in oncology research, is that right?
Right. I never had any experience with oncology. So a lot of times what they do is um if you apply to be a clinical research nurse in a field, they would prefer that you either have research experience first or you have experience in that particular body system. So you don't have to have prior clinical research experience to be a research nurse, but it's helpful if you have one or the other.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And how do you think that your experience that you did have at Bedside, how do you think that that like informs your approach to patient care in clinical trials? Whether that is just like how you think about patients or participants instead of subjects, or, like how do you think that your nursing background pulls into this new role?
It's good because you can actually form relationships with these participants who are coming in over and over again. You get to see them many, many times. So you really get to form bonds with them. You get to know them. You get to know all about their family. You get to hear stories like they'll go on a vacation and come back and tell you all about it. And it's really great. And so there's that human aspect that nurses really kind of I think most nurses like to connect with their patients, and that this really gives you the opportunities to do that. Um, and then the other thing that's important and beneficial about being a nurse and switching over is that you have to really always be assessing them for any kind of adverse events. And so you have your nursing eyes on all the time because in these it's not just a protocol, but there's called the investigational brochure, the IV. It has the whole background of the drug's development from beginning to everything is in there. They're like really thick. You'd never read a whole one through. But it gives all the expected side effects in there. So it is good to read through those and know what it is you are going to be looking for, kind of side effects. And then given the way the drug works, you're going to look for things that maybe aren't in there, but just what do I expect to see in this patient? What could go wrong? So you're kind of looking for that as well.
Yeah,
So that human
definitely.
aspect and the nursing aspect just sort of mesh together.
Yeah. I know a lot of nurses, especially right now with how, patient ratios have grown over the past few years, are more pressed for time than ever in their shift. And, I talk to so many nurses who just really seek that like extra connection with their patients, the extra like time to actually like get to know them and connect with them. So it's special that this is a place where you get to do that. You get to be a nurse, you get to connect with your patients, and you get to
Mhm.
also make an impact on just like the future of medicine and like
Yep.
development of these new medicines and treatments.
Yeah.
Um, if there's a nurse listening today who thinks that research sounds great after all, it's not the college research papers that they had in mind. What tips would you give to a nurse who's considering a pivot in that direction?
Um, just look and see what posts are out there. Do a do a search for clinical trial nurses, clinical research nurses. Look for clinical research coordinators or CRCs. Because even though that isn't, sometimes they just post it as that when they will really take a nurse. So that's what I'm saying. Don't rule it out just because it doesn't say the word nurse in it. Go onto clinicaltrials.gov. That will list every single trial going on in our country. Just start looking around at everything you can find. Go to the FDA and click on clinical trials. I'm sure there's I know there's another website. If you just Google it, you're going to find it. You're going to find it. Especially the nurses are so resourceful. You can find anything. You pick up your phone, you can find it. But if you just really just start looking into it, you'll find ways in. It's easier as a clinical research nurse to get in than if you're not a nurse. I will say that right now. And I'm sorry for people that aren't nurses, but it's just easier if you are, because you already have the clinical knowledge. So they will hire you for a lot more positions than they would take for somebody else that didn't have any research experience. So we do have an advantage.
If you'd like to connect with Amy after today's show, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.